greeted a woman on the street. In October 2024, 22-year-old Natasha Pallavicino stabbed 22-year-old Mariana Grinspan in the chest in the town of Gonzales Gatan. She also knifed the woman Grinspan had greeted in the armpit. Surveillance footage showed the moment Grinspan collapsed onto the ground from fatal injuries. He was pronounced dead at the scene and Pallavicino was taken into custody on suspicion of murder. The victim's father, Ramon, told news outlet El Treche that Pallavicino had tried stabbing his son a few months earlier, but that he didn't file a police report. He said he decided not to complain at the urging of his son, who didn't want to take legal action against Pallavicino. But the authorities got involved anyway, and an order of protection was issued, banning Pallavicino from going within 900 feet of Grinspan. Determined to repair the ailing relationship, Grinspan let the restraining order expire without applying to renew it. According to a neighbor, Pallavicino used to routinely beat the victim. She also supposedly forced Grinspan to sleep outside and pelted him with rocks and spat on him. Pallavicino has already served a year in prison for stabbing a previous boyfriend and remains in custody as she waits to answer for the homicide charge that she's facing.
I love Rise Mushroom Coffee, and not just because I look good drinking it.
Hello there.
20-year-old University of Pittsburgh student Alina Shaquette was found dead in a pool of blood inside her Oakland, Pennsylvania home in October of 2017. She had been bludgeoned to death with 2 claw hammers and cut with a knife, leaving her face covered in chop and stab wounds. Shaquette's slain body was discovered in her off-campus apartment by her father, who broke the young woman's bedroom door down after she failed to show up at a planned event with her family. Investigators traced the crime to her on and off boyfriend of more than 2 years, 21-year-old Matthew Darby. At the time of her murder, Shaquette had an order of protection against Darby, who was accused of scaling her house and breaking in through a second-story window. In her application for the restraining order, Shaquette wrote that Darby broke into her house because she ended their relationship and had stopped answering his calls. The young woman's roommates described Darby as controlling, claiming that Shaquette had to frequently change her social media passwords in order to prevent him from accessing her accounts. But Darby always made Shaquette tell him her new passwords and sometimes pretended to be her and blocked her friends while accessing the accounts. By the time Shaquette's body was found, Darby had gone on the run. He was captured in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in order to avoid the death penalty. Darby reportedly had a lengthy history of felony convictions, including violence against women and threat of violence, which was a factor in prosecutors' decision to pursue capital punishment in the absence of a plea agreement. After agreeing to the plea deal, Darby was sentenced to life without parole. In early 2022, he won a new hearing based on his new attorney's argument that Darby should have never been allowed to plead guilty to first-degree murder. The lawyer argued that his client had committed at worst third-degree murder. There have been no recent updates on the case, leaving the outcome of the hearing unclear. Shortly before 6 a.m. on September 4th, 2022, 47-year-old Shaka Chambers snuck into the Portland, Oregon apartment of his on and off girlfriend, Jessica Langer. After entering through a window, he fatally shot Langer's new boyfriend, 27-year-old Juan Artiles, and then fled the scene. Chambers and 20-year-old Langer had met at a party 2 years earlier. Their relationship was tumultuous, and in early 2022, Langer stopped sharing her cell phone location with Chambers. He attached a GPS device to Langer's car and began tracking her without her knowledge. A few months later, Chambers showed up unannounced at Langer's apartment and let himself in with a key that Langer never gave him and didn't know he had. Langer dialed 911 and Chambers left, but he held out hope that they would eventually talk and repair their relationship. He was admittedly worried that Langer would find a new man, and his fear grew when she blocked him. Artiles and Langer had just been on their second date when Artiles was murdered. Chambers was charged with the crime about a week later. He maintained his innocence, arguing through his attorney that there was no DNA, fingerprint, or cell phone evidence linking him to the crime scene. Meanwhile, the prosecution argued that only someone who is familiar with the apartment's layout would have been able to carry out the crime and flee in just 90 seconds. After deliberating for less than 3 hours, a jury found Chambers guilty of second-degree murder, first-degree burglary, and unlawful use of a weapon. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 28 years. Former romantic partners Megan Brailsford and Daniel Dugdale were both accused of horrific crimes after ending their 2-year relationship, including murder. The pair were also the target of death threats, prank phone calls, unsolicited intimate photos, and other alarming behavior. Police launched an investigation after being called to Brailsford and Dugdale's home in Peterborough, England, by an anonymous third party who claimed that Dugdale had confessed to murdering someone. Officers arrived to find both Dugdale seemingly unaware of the allegations, and there was no sign of any violence taking place. At the time, Brailsford and Dugdale were still living together despite having broken up. At Dugdale's insistence, officers allowed him to call Brailsford, who was at work, and told him she was fine. Sufficiently convinced that no foul play had occurred, the cops left, only to return 3 weeks later after an anonymous caller accused Brailsford of murder. Once again, police arrived at the home to find that nothing sinister had taken place. By that point, Brailsford and Dugdale were living apart. They both told law enforcement similar stories about being relentlessly cyberstalked by an unknown culprit. Both parties had received hundreds of harassing messages along with voicemails from someone who was obviously disguising their voice. The stalker also made false reports to social workers claiming that Brailsford was using drugs in front of her kids and otherwise putting her children in danger. As part of the investigation, police collected Brailsford and Dugdale's phones. They soon discovered evidence that Dugdale had orchestrated the entire stalking campaign while portraying himself as a victim in order to evade suspicion. On his phone, investigators found tens of thousands of messages that had been sent to Brailsford from the stalker's accounts, as well as evidence that the stalker knew the woman very well. Dugdale's role in the situation wasn't necessarily surprising, given his alleged history of abuse and possessive behavior. He was ultimately convicted of stalking, inciting fear of violence, and perverting the course of justice, landing him behind bars for 10-year-old Livy Lewis was found shot to death in her car along a roadside in Hemp Hill, Texas. Behind the car in fetal position was her ex-boyfriend, Matthew Edgar. He claimed to have no recollection of what had happened to himself or Lewis. While retracing Lewis's steps, investigators learned that she had been at a party just 2 hours before the discovery of her body. While there, she ran into Edgar, whom she had broken up with just weeks earlier. Lewis spent much of the night ignoring Edgar while bonding with his ex-wife, Montana Bockel, and the two women were still at the gathering even after most guests had left. During the party, Edgar overheard someone saying that Lewis was planning to spend the night with the host, Bobby Ozan. He flew into a rage and attacked his ex-wife, who he believed could have talked Lewis out of staying with Ozan. Edgar also kicked Bockel's car, but Ozan restrained him, giving Lewis and Bockel an opportunity to flee. The two women went to separate locations, and at 3:34 a.m., Bockel texted Edgar and asked him where Lewis was. He sent a one-word response: dead. Based on the evidence, detectives theorized that Lewis had pulled over on the side of the road to talk with Edgar and that Edgar killed her. Emergency responders took Edgar to the hospital while police began investigating the scene. Near Lewis's car, officers found the gun that had been used to kill the young woman. Authorities charged Edgar with Lewis's murder despite his claim that the last thing he remembered was passing out drunk on his porch and then waking up in an ambulance. Edgar's case went to trial in January of 2022, but the proceedings were interrupted on the third morning when he failed to show for court. He had let the battery on his GPS ankle monitor die and had gone on the run. His whereabouts remained a mystery for nearly a year until December of 2022, when he was found hiding out at a house just yards away from his grandparents' home. The trial had proceeded in Edgar's absence, and he had been found guilty of Lewis's murder. In January of 2023, almost a year to the day since he went on the run, he was sentenced to 99 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Canadian teenager Stephanie Rengel's life was cut short on New Year's Day in 2008 when her ex-boyfriend David Bagshaw stabbed her to death in Toronto. Bagshaw carried out the crime at the incessant pressure of his girlfriend, Melissa Todorovich, who had repeatedly threatened to break up with him or withhold intimacy unless he killed Rengel. The victim and Bagshaw had dated years earlier, yet Todorovich had become irrationally jealous of Rengel. In 2009, both Bagshaw and Todorovich were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, with a 7-year minimum for Todorovich. In 2018, Todorovich was granted 6 months of day parole despite failing to impress the parole board during her hearing. and reportedly lying about numerous previously agreed upon facts of the case. Todorovic told the board that she had met Rengel on one occasion, yet it had been made clear at trial that the two women had never met. And while she tried acting apologetic and remorseful during the hearing, her words and mannerisms came across as noticeably fake to Rengel's family, who attended the hearing to discourage the parole board from granting release. Just a few months after being released, Todorovic's parole was revoked due to her failure to notify her officer of any romantic relationships. She had gotten caught up in a love triangle, but it ended with her return to prison in April 2024. Todorovic was granted day parole for a second time in the form of 4 15-day absences at a halfway house. The decision surprised Rengel's mother, Patricia Hong, who told the Toronto Star that the only time Todorovic showed emotion during the hearing was when she discussed her past body image issues. Rengel's loved ones do not feel that Todorovic has ever expressed genuine remorse for her actions, but they knew she would see freedom again and prepared for that day, knowing there was nothing they could do to stop it from eventually happening. When 27-year-old Jennifer Banas Acosta caught her boyfriend of 3 years talking with another woman on Facebook Messenger in May of 2023, she became extremely angry and jealous. Acosta's boyfriend left their apartment in Lady Lake, Florida, so she placed his clothing near the front door. When he returned the next day, Acosta slapped him in the face while they were walking downstairs together. She was subsequently booked into Lake County Jail on a battery charge, but updates have not been forthcoming, leaving the outcome of the case unclear.
Break free with the new Opera GX, the browser that puts you in control with a brand new design that frees up even more pixels for personalization.
During the pre-dawn hours one October morning in 2017, a gunman fatally shot 30-year-old Christina Ashley Rucker in front of her young son and nearly killed her sister, 28-year-old Lisa Danielle Rucker, at the Young Women's Jacksonville, Florida condominium. Investigators traced the double shooting to Christina's abusive boyfriend, 32-year-old Chad Olan Absher, who was reportedly determined not to go back to jail. According to the victim's family, Absher had mistreated Christina for years leading up to her death. Following his capture, Absher denied being the shooter, instead pointing the finger at Christina. When the case finally went to trial in 2022, 5 years after the murder, the prosecution argued that it would have been impossible for Christina to cause her own injuries. After being found guilty of first-degree murder, Absher could be seen smiling and blowing kisses at the victim's loved ones in court. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jealous over his ex-girlfriend's relationship with a new man, 23-year-old Caden Pryor went to Alicia Parrin's home in Brighton, England, late one night in August 2023 and viciously attacked her boyfriend, 25-year-old Harris Tompkins, with a hunting knife. Accompanied by his friend, Jason Curtis, Pryor stabbed Tompkins to death as he lay in bed. During Pryor and Parrin's relationship, Pryor had been extremely controlling and abusive toward the woman, even threatening to kill her if she was ever with another man. Determined to escape the toxic situation, Parrin got her own flat just a month before Tompkins was murdered, but Pryor refused to accept that the relationship was over. On the day before her untimely death, the young woman had text messaged Pryor telling him to never contact her again. The following evening, Pryor and Curtis learned that Parrin and Tompkins were also out drinking in the same neighborhood. At one point, Pryor sent Parrin a video of her kissing another man, along with a message about how he felt wronged by her actions. Later that night, the two men could be seen searching for the couple during the early morning hours in surveillance footage from local businesses. After failing to find their targets, Pryor and Curtis took a taxi to Parrin's flat. Pryor had a copy of the key, and at 5:30 a.m., he and Curtis ambushed Tompkins while he slept. After stabbing the victim multiple times and punching Parrin while Curtis acted as a lookout, Pryor and his accomplice left the residence. Police arrested Pryor at his residence a short while later, while Curtis was found hiding in some bushes. Both men were convicted of their roles in the deadly attack, and Pryor received a life term with a minimum of 28 years, while Curtis was sentenced to life with a minimum of 23 years. 39-year-old Stephanie Hansen and 30-year-old Sheldon Rodriguez worked together as cargo agents at Heathrow Airport and were flatmates. Although they had been intimate in the past, Hansen no longer wanted to be more than friends with Rodriguez, who became completely obsessed with the woman after she ended their fling. In 2022, Hansen began dating their married co-worker, father of three, Kelsko Caribbean. By then, Rodriguez had bugged he and Hansen's flat in West London with listening devices. He spent 3 hours a day listening in, eavesdropping during some of Hansen's most private moments. Rodriguez also tried scaring Hansen by sending her a death threat while posing as Caribbean's wife. On December 22nd, 2022, Rodriguez entered the apartment and stabbed Hansen to death. He then called emergency services and pretended that he had just discovered the body while pointing the finger at Caribbean as the alleged killer. But it didn't take long for detectives to identify Rodriguez as the prime suspect in the case, and the search of his text messages revealed the extent of his obsession with Hansen. It had been no secret that Rodriguez was upset with Hansen for friend-zoning him, or that he disapproved of her being with another man. In the conversations, Rodriguez told Hansen that he could hear her moaning while in her bedroom with Caribbean. Hansen denied that she and Caribbean were being intimate, blaming the sound on chirping birds, but Rodriguez didn't buy the explanation. In the meantime, Rodriguez also professed his undying love for Hansen, telling her he would wait 50 years for her. He offered to get plastic surgery in order to be more attractive to her, and even asked how he ranked in size compared to Hansen's new lover. Following Hansen's murder, Rodriguez tried to depict himself as a protective and caring friend, but the police didn't fall for it, and he was charged with Hansen's murder. He was found guilty in early 2024 and was sentenced to life with a minimum of 25 years.
Get brighter, firmer-looking skin with Tatcha's revolutionary new brightening serum. Powered by 12-hour time-release vitamin C. Proven to reduce the look of post-acne marks in 1 week.
Convinced that her boyfriend, McKinley Weston, was cheating on her, 21-year-old Abiana Williams sent him a text message stating, "I hope your mum likes being burned alive," on September 3, 2020. She also threatened to throw a brick through the woman's window. Williams then made her way over to the Lansing, Michigan home of her boyfriend's mother, 59-year-old Melissa Weston, and set the dwelling ablaze in the middle of the night. The house quickly became engulfed in flames, killing Weston and her 2 grandsons, Aston Griffin and Jesse Klein IV. By the time firefighters arrived at the scene, all 3 victims were dead. Investigators initially ruled out arson, but the decision was later reversed based on evidence and witness tips. 13 days after the deadly fire, Williams was arrested on 3 charges of homicide and 3 counts of first-degree arson. During Williams's trial, the defense claimed that the victim, Melissa Weston, accidentally set the fire with a lit cigarette. The prosecution argued that this was impossible because if a carelessly discarded or unattended cigarette were to blame for the fire, the victims would have had a chance to escape. Furthermore, 2 bricks were found inside a home next to a smashed window, along with evidence that the fire was started nearby. The man who drove Williams to Weston's house testified that she was extremely upset because she had tried calling McKinley's cell phone, and another woman had picked up. In reality, McKinley was passed out drunk when Williams made the call, and his sister-in-law had answered and claimed to be his mistress for the apparent fun of getting Williams riled up. In June of 2022, a jury found Williams guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Late one night in December, the residents with their 2 children, LaTondra, made a beeline for the couple's bedroom and attacked Camp, leading to a prolonged struggle between the 2 men. Camp had no idea who the intruder was. He would later learn that Janik had dated LaTondra during a previous break in her and Camp's relationship. Janik had broken up with LaTondra when she and Camp got back together, and LaTondra was unwilling to accept that the relationship was over. Janik called 911 as Camp fought for his life against a much larger stranger. The fight eventually migrated downstairs, where Camp managed to grab his muzzle loader. He ordered LaTondra to get the fuck out of his house, but LaTondra ignored the command and grabbed the barrel of Camp's firearm, leading to another struggle between the men. They also fought over a shotgun, breaking it in half, and beat each other with the pieces. Nearly 8 minutes into Janik's 911 call, police had still not arrived, and LaTondra was still attacking Camp. Fearing for his life and for his family's safety, Camp grabbed a Sig Sauer pistol out of a cabinet and shot LaTondra in the stomach. 8.5 minutes later, Camp shot LaTondra in the back of the head, killing him at the scene. Prosecutors charged Camp with manslaughter, arguing that the first gunshot legally qualified as self-defense, but that the second gunshot occurred when LaTondra was incapacitated and therefore no longer posed a threat to the victims. Describing the second gunshot as an execution, the authorities accused Camp of taking the law into his own hands. Camp maintained his innocence, noting that the 20-minute police response time essentially gave him no choice but to handle the situation on his own. He claimed that he believed he was in imminent danger when he fired both gunshots, and that LaTondra had continued to threaten his life after the first gunshot. Testifying in his own defense in late November of 2024, Camp claimed that he decided to pull the trigger for a second time when he saw LaTondra getting up off the floor despite his injuries. After deliberating for less than 5 hours, a jury found Camp not guilty. He left the courthouse a free man, finally able to move on with his life. In July of 2011, 27-year-old mother of two Laura Ackerson's dismembered remains were found in a creek in Houston, Texas, more than 1,200 miles from her home in Raleigh, North Carolina. She had gone radio silent days earlier after telling a friend that she was on her way to visit her two sons at the apartment of their father, Grant Hayes, and his wife, Amanda Hayes. A few years earlier, Ackerson had followed Grant to the U.S. Virgin Islands, where he had moved to promote his music career, but Ackerson eventually got tired of Grant's possessive ways and moved back to the US mainland. After she settled in North Carolina, Grant met and married Amanda, and the couple also eventually moved to Raleigh. At the time of Ackerson's murder, she and Grant were entangled in an acrimonious child custody battle. After Ackerson went missing, Grant and Amanda had traveled to Texas to visit Amanda's sister, Karen Berry, who told police that the couple had been acting strange. Amanda had reportedly admitted to hurting Ackerson, and surveillance footage showed Grant buying muriatic acid and gloves prior to the murder, indicating that he and Amanda hoped to dissolve Ackerson's body. Grant was also seen returning to the store to buy a reciprocating saw and heavy-duty cleaning supplies, suggesting that the body disposal had not gone as initially planned. Based on their findings, authorities charged Grant and Amanda with Ackerson's murder. They both pleaded not guilty and were tried separately in 2013. Grant's defense attorneys argued that just because there was evidence of him participating in the cover-up of the crime doesn't mean he actually killed Ackerson. He pointed the finger at Amanda, but the jury nevertheless found him guilty of first-degree murder, resulting in a life sentence without the possibility of parole. During Amanda's trial a few months later, the defense portrayed her as a victim of Grant and his controlling ways. Amanda took the stand in her own defense, claiming she had no idea Ackerson was even dead until they arrived at her sister's house in Texas. She told the jury that Grant threatened to harm her and her child from a previous relationship unless she helped dispose of Ackerson's body, but was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 16.5 years in prison. Amanda was subsequently prosecuted in the state of Texas for tampering with evidence, resulting in a 20-year prison sentence. She continues to deny any role in Ackerson's murder to this day.